right, guys, welcome to Comics, Cards, and Brew, episode lucky number 7. So I'm really excited that on my episode 7, I've got one of my favorite authors here with me. You guys know him as E.E. Knight, but now I get to actually call him Eric. So haha, more fun on me. I know him better than you do, so it's kind of like a little fun way my ways. But he's an award-winning national best-selling author. So if you'll give a warm welcome to Eric.
Thank you very much. And you can call me E, actually. It's an old nickname. It goes back to college. My girlfriend there, her name was Molly. She was from Colorado. That might ring a bell for Vampire Earth fans. She used to call me E, and it just caught on. I think it was a Colorado thing. But yeah, I was always E in college. But Eric works too, so whichever you're more comfortable with.
And so the you just kind of kept that with you, even like through that's crazy that you kept that for your publishing. I think that's awesome. That's very unique.
Yeah, well, and also the first science fiction I ever read was E.E. Doc Smith. You know, they're my actual initials, but it was kind of cool to do a callback to that. And you know, it's gender neutral too. You know,
very true.
And I just thought it looked nice. It looked classy. So
I liked it.
So I went with
it. Caught up. It caught me. It caught a lot of readers too. So
went with the initials. You know, if you don't mind, before we get started, I've got a question for you.
Well, I like this.
Form a little bit.
I like it. Back and forth.
Why is it called Comics, Cards, and Brew?
So Comics, Cards, and Brew is actually the company I created 3 years ago. I actually own a online comic book store that pre-COVID was doing exceptionally well, had lots of sales, lots of buyers. And then after COVID hit and everything kind of shut down, comics shut down for a while. I'm starting to phase out of it and go back to my writing. And so I started a show where I interview writers and artists on here. And so the name was because I sold comics and cards and brew because I like my alcohol and my beer. So that's where the name came from, honestly.
Okay, I'm doing Sam Adams.
Ooh.
He was a brewer and a patriot for you history fans out there.
Ooh, so. Very nice. Is that the regular lager?
Yeah, just the regular. It's actually out of the Christmas assortment, which normally I'm more of a Leinenkugels guy. Upper Midwest, you know, it's what we drink. But I just think the Sam Adams Christmas assortment just, you know, blows everything else as far as holiday packages out of the water. Really a good mix. There's not a clinker in the bunch, and the old Fezziwig is just fantastic. I wish they made 12 packs of nothing but old Fezziwig.
Really? You know, see, I'm drinking Stella right now, but I'm a Sam Adams fan. I just recently got onto the Oktoberfest brew. I really like the flavor on that one. I wasn't a big summer ale fan, and the Oktoberfest really just got me hooked where I started buying cases of that. I love that. That's one of my favorites. So I'm gonna have to try
it's a wonderful mix. There's something kind of light and citrusy, which is how my wife likes her stuff. There's a porter. I'm a big fan of porters. There's a winter ale, an IPA. You know, it's a real nice mix. Plus they throw in a couple of the regular old Sam Adams bottles, which
there you go. See,
which is what I'm doing to get me through this.
See, this is why Brew is in here. That's why we do, because you know, I've been in the comic industry now for actually, ironically, 6 years. About the time I stopped writing my first go around, I started working as a correctional officer and started selling comics just to make extra money before my kid came. My first daughter was being born, so I needed money quick, and so I started selling my personal collection, and it took off more than what I could have ever expected. And, you know, now it's just, you know, I had to realign my passion more. And I realized I wasn't passionate about comic books. I would just like the money that came in from it. I'm passionate about my writing. So I had to kind of shift gears a bit and see where I want to spend my extra time at this point in my juncture. So I have a question for you. And this is mainly this might be just my curiosity, but I know I had some people actually reach out and ask me to say, if you don't ask this, I'm gonna be mad. I'm like, okay, so I'll start with this one. And it's, do you have a favorite series that you've written or a specific book? And if so, why?
Well, emotionally, you know, Way of the Wolf was my first. So that's always the special one. You know, when you walk into a bookstore, I always hung out at bookstores a lot. I was a nerdy kid, you know, and you see yourself, you know, on the shelf with all the other guys you grew up admiring. That's a great moment, you know. It really meant a lot to me. And I'm sorry if I've got a bit of a halting manner of speaking. I've got a little bit of a speech impediment, so hope it's not interfering with things. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I've got 3 kids, 2 of them are in speech therapy. Anyway, yeah, so Way of the Wolf, again, a strong emotional connection to it. And then I guess the other one would probably be Dragon Outcast, just because that's the one that changed the most from, what I'd outlined. I'd outlined Richard III, and in the course of writing it, it turned into I, Claudius. He started out a villain all the way through, and he became a much more sympathetic guy who, had some problems and made some mistakes, and every now and then had to be really tough. But he was a much more sympathetic character by the time it was finished. So I had to do a little bit of, quiet retconning of, events in the opening of the novel. I don't know if you've read the series, but the first 3 books, they all start basically with the same scene. These dragons coming out of their egg, and the males fight for dominance in the nest. And then, he ends up terribly wounded and is kind of this outcast. And so in when I was writing Dragon Champion, the first, he was just a, vicious little bastard. And and by the time, I'd plowed my way through the 3rd, I liked him a lot better. So I had to go and, kind of do a little rashomon with the opening fight between him and his brother.
I have to say, I love
but yeah, those would probably be my, I'm sorry, my phone's talking to me. I would, yeah, those are the 2. And then if you want a personal, kind of the other side of the coin, the story about Unkind the Mind really kind of disappointed me, because that had started out a very different sort of book. Is like Bram Stoker's Dracula. It was filled with like newspaper stories and clippings and bulletins and reports back and forth between, the quizzling officers on what was going on and stuff like that. And nobody liked it. The publisher didn't think it was working and stuff like that. So I had to like quick rewrite the whole thing from Manka's point of view. And, I was in too much of a rush. And, that one ended up being a disappointment to me from, what my original vision for what it was going to be to what it turned into.
Man, well, and what I think is interesting about one thing you said, especially with your Dragon Outcast, is how much the character changed. And it, like you were surprised by, like, oh, I like this guy now. And I like hearing that, because a lot of people who ask me, they're like, oh, so you know everything about your characters? I'm like, no, I'm like, I learned about them as they're telling me. Like, I half the time I don't know what the character's going to go do, especially in a series. Like, I only have one series I'm working on, but one of the characters changed drastically from book 1 to 3. And I had a reader ask me, like, did you plan that from the beginning? And I said, no, he was actually planned to be bad. I thought he was going to be bad the whole time. And come book 3, he has this redemptive moment. And I'm like, way to go, Gage. I didn't know you had it in you. Like, it was shocking to me. So I'm glad to hear that you had the same, a similar story with one of your books.
Yeah. And then you've got to deal with what you've already put in print, and
yeah, no, that it's true. Because then I had to figure out, well, okay, Gage, you want to do this. How am I? I've already published the other 2.
How's it going to work? Yeah. It was just crazy. Do you mind me asking you another question?
No, I like the back and forth. I love it.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a ton of ways to tell a story. You're into comics. You can write comics. You can do films. You can sing a ballad. And now video games are going to be the way of the future of storytelling, is for at least a big chunk of it, as far as I'm concerned. There's writing TV scripts. There's writing movies. Why do you like to just put paragraphs down on paper and get it out as a novel?
Fair question. So one of them is I'm no good at the rest. No, I'm just kidding. No, no. One of them is that for me, like, I actually tried writing a screenplay when I was very young. I was about 16 or 17, and I had this great idea for a screenplay. And I was in theater in high school, so I thought I knew how to write dialogue. And this character walks off scene. I wrote probably 15 pages. Had a friend of mine look at it, and his words were, "What is this shit?" And I said, okay, so so clearly I'm not doing good at that. So I threw that away. Thank God I don't have it anymore. And, I'm a drummer too, so I like music, but, I tried writing songs, just couldn't get the gist of it. And for some reason, I started one day just writing a story. I was probably about the same age, 16, 17, where I really first sat down to really write one. And it came so easily and it came so smoothly that before I knew it, and in one sitting, I'd sat down and written, a few chapters with a book I didn't have a title for. I didn't know where it was going. And I just realized that for me, it was very emotional to write, at least for me, and very fulfilling to write the story format that way. I just feel like that I'm able to, with the novel format, get more into my characters' heads than I would if I did like a screenplay, where for me, try to do a screenplay was very mechanical, and I didn't have a connection to my my characters. And with my novels, it's a question I'll ask you too. When I outline, I do story beat format. So I kind of do a paragraph or two about each chapter and then work my way through it. And I've got character, outlines and stuff like that. So I was able to just really get in touch more with my characters that way then. And another thing, I can't draw for crap. I have no artistic ability. So I could not tell stories through art. It'd be pencil drawing, like stick figures, and it would be terrible if it was art. We'll just say that.
Yeah. You actually bring up, with your first screenplay, it triggered a memory in me. My actual first novel was a cyberpunk thriller called Pipeline. That, this was in the 90s, everything was cyberpunk. It was super hot,
Yes.
And I thought, well, everybody's writing cyberpunk stuff. And so I wrote this really dreadful cyberpunk novel because, it wasn't what I was into. And my aunt, God rest her, she died at the beginning of the COVID epidemic. My aunt was also a writer, and she read it or read some of it, I don't know, as much as she could stand. And she looked at me and said, Eric, I look at your bookshelves, and I see a lot of science fiction, I see a lot of history, war adventure novels by Alistair MacLean. But show me all the cyberpunk titles. And I was like, I don't really like to read it. None of them have, really impressed me that much that I, got super into them. And she said, well, Eric, you're not going to have any success in this field unless you write something you want to read. And that's kind of when the light went on. And like the very next day, I started working on Way the Wolf because I love vampire stories, and I'd always wondered why, given all the power that they had, they weren't running the show and breeding us like hogs.
Mm-hmm.
And awesome. That's where all that came from. She just said, write a story you want to sit down and read.
Yes, and then when you say that, it made me think of it too. I guess another reason that I wanted to write stories is, as you can see, and this is only 2 out of, I think I've got 6 bookshelves in the house. And I've loved to read novel format since the time I was a little kid. So it is what I knew and what I was familiar with. And I had a decent grasp at the time of how it worked and what I could have, the mechanics of a novel and stuff like that. So, and you started writing Way of the Wolf the very next day. Or getting there ready to go the next day. That is crazy. I love that.
Yeah. After she told me, it literally was, like the cartoon light bulb appears over your head, So
that's awesome.
So yeah.
I love it. Well, that kind of ties into the next question. Actually, hearing you, it fills in right to the next thing, which is, if you were to consider yourself, do you think you're either a plotter, as in terms that you outline everything you're going to do from beginning of book to end, or beginning of series to end, or are you more of a discovery writer type, like Pantser, where you kind of just sit down and let it flow out of you?
Well, I can talk a little. It's a little bit of both. I will write a 1-page outline of what the story of the novel is going to be. So, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end.
Okay.
But it's not very filled in. And then as I go through, I decide, well, this idea is working better than I thought it would, so let's expand this. This is not working at all, what I put here in my 1-page summary, let's figure out a way to get rid of it or do it in a different way, and I'm a little undisciplined. I'll let myself go off on tangents sometimes, and sometimes they survive the editorial process, sometimes they don't. But so it's a both. And then once I'm actually writing, I'll write a little 1-page summary, like when I'm planning out a chapter. I'll do a little 1-page summary of all the scenes,
Perfect.
What's going to happen this scene, what's going to happen this scene, what's going to happen this scene, and there's my chapter. I just slowly expand. Sometimes under my little scene descriptions. I'll have a key piece of dialogue, something that occurred to me in the shower or something like that. Or, this person suddenly storms in and blurts out something, interrupting what we were going to find out,
Yeah.
But yeah, my outlines are not super detailed. I know people who write, 10,000 word outlines, and then they have a lot less work to do when it comes to draft, but they draft very quickly. My drafts go a little more slowly because the outline's a little sketchier. But I've never been able to work from a super detailed outline.
And it's reassuring to me to hear that, because a lot of especially back when I first started, I was getting not criticism, but people were like, well, you're not outlining out enough. Like I show an outline in writing groups, which that's a whole nother topic, writing groups. But I would present like an outline, and it was same as yours. It was maybe a page and a half, and they're like, well, how you can't get a novel from this? And I'm like, I can. And they're like, no, here's what you need. And they whip out this folder, and I'm like, the hell is that? I'm like, is that your rough draft? And here they open up this very detailed, very precise Roman numeral lettered outline that I'm like, okay, we back in school? And he'd show it to me, go, this is how you're supposed to outline. And I remember from that day forward, I very respectfully said, look, if that works for you, that's great. But that doesn't work for me. That's not how stories go for me. And I remember he told me, well, then you're just not going to be a writer. And I'm like, okay. So I was nice. I didn't bite his head off. I just said, okay, so that's your opinion. And I'm the same as you. I start off with a very brief understanding of where the novel's going to go, beginning, middle, and end type thing. And then when I go into it, a lot of times it'll expand way beyond what I first thought. Like the one I'm working on now is called Approaching Darkness. And what I thought was going to be like the first 3 chapters is end up being 10. It just really blew up way past what I thought it was going to be. And so it's good to hear that you write the same way. You do that brief like chapter thing as you go. Because for me, it's fun doing it that way. It keeps me kind of not surprised, but it keeps it new and fresh instead of knowing exactly what's going to go on every single moment. It makes it a little bit more fun for me as a writer.
Yeah, well, again, the only novel I ever wrote where my beginning, middle, and end changed radically was again Dragon Outcast, just because I had to find a different way. But all of the others, things changed a lot, but it was still basically the beginning, middle, and end that I outlined.
Yep.
I've hardly ever, I always have a last scene in mind that I'm writing towards,
Oh, you do?
I know some of these mystery guys, they write the last scene first and work backwards and things like that. Man. But I always feel like I'm writing to a point. I mean, if there's one thing I can do a real good last scene. I do some good first scenes, but I'm really proud of some of my last scenes. And I write toward them. They're usually the last thing I write, but they're the thing I have the best vision of, as I'm working towards it.
That is such a cool way to explain it. And not to toot your horn, but I'm going to anyway. From a reader's perspective, you're right, because every time, especially both the Vampire Earth and the Age of Your Dragon books, both of them, you don't end them on cliffhangers where like the reader, whereas a reader, I'm mad. You end on a note that wraps up the story, but I know, oh shit, this is where we're going. And it very much like, then you're like, I got to get the next one. So I would agree with you. You can tell that your last scene, I knew from reading, I'm like, okay, you knew where this was going. And I think it's cool that you said you had it in your head that you're writing towards that. I find that very awesome that you did that. And it does show in your work for sure.
Well, thanks. I'm glad it's working for you. I lost some people after Tale of Thunderbolt because it was so downbeat,
You lost people though?
Yeah. When the numbers on Valentine's Rising were nothing like the first couple of weeks of Tale of Thunderbolt. Man. But it kind of gradually, maybe some of those people said, I'm never reading him again. And we're like, well, what the hell? It's out. I'll give it a whirl.
I hope so.
They realized that.
Yeah, because for me, because I read Dune, I know the scenes you're talking about. I don't want to do any spoilers, but if you haven't read Tale of Thunderbolt yet, people, you're way the hell behind. You got to catch up. But I do remember reading that one and ending like with a, what the hell? But then knowing that there was a book 4 coming, that it wasn't to a point where I'm like, well, I'm not going to, it was more like, well, now I got to pick up the next one, see where is this going to go from here? How is it going to get taken up to the next thing? So that's how they should have.
Yeah, I got my fingers burned pretty bad by that one. So I've never done that.
You've never done it again?
Quite that way since,
Oh, gosh.
But Yeah, I thought it worked really well when I was doing it, because
Yeah,
I
like
was
if you enjoyed it.
already, while the editors were messing around with Tale of Thunderbolt, I was deep into Valentine's Rising,
Of course.
and they're grabbing the train, they're heading for the hills, and
Yeah.
I had no idea the audience was going to go,
Yeah, I'm
what a
surprised. I mean,
bummer.
well, no, the most of us weren't that. The ones you heard from may have thought that way, but there's no way that you couldn't. I mean, that series was so great, even from book one, is so grand in scope. I mean, there really is nothing. And I know that they've had now, like, I know you see the book behind me, like the City of Mirrors, like the Passage trilogy. There's other books that have tried to do, apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic vampire novels, and to me, some of them are just and it's not their fault, but a lot of them are shallow. Like it just takes place here. They don't do a lot of, there's not a whole lot of futuristic stuff that you had to explain with yours. I mean, yours takes place way in the future. So from the beginning, you're like, oh shit, we're in 2065. This is way, way down the road. So to me, that always appealed to me because the culture is different. Everything in that novel is different than any other vampire novel that I've read since then or even before then. So for me as a reader, I loved it because everything in that book was new. The way people acted, what they wore, how they, and everything was just different. So I take it from me and the ones who I know that we loved it. We did love it.
Oh, thanks. Well, the inspiration for when I said it was actually George Orwell's 1984. George Orwell's maybe the only author out there who I've made, this huge effort to not just read all his books, but all his letters, everything he ever wrote, trying to figure out what he thought about, what he thought was important to him. Really like George Orwell. And I thought 1984 was so cool in that it was set, a generation or maybe even two generations after, the revolution and the party had taken over and stuff like that. And there were just a few real old people who had kind of muddled memories about what it was like before. It was very tough to get, the actual story. And that's not many post-apocalyptic books. They're either set, a year after, and everyone's trying to survive all the crap, and there's dead bodies everywhere, or it's 700 years after, and it's kind of like a Can of Sulfur Leibowitz, fantastic book and all that, but it's it's so far back in the past, there's no more living memory, and just little bits and pieces are screwed up.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's why I liked it.
Yeah, so not I can't think of a huge number of post-apocalyptic books that are, a couple of generations later.
No, there's not.
So it just seemed to be a spot that people hadn't done much with. So trying to do something different, always trying to do something different.
Well, it worked. It worked. Now my phone's buzzing. Don't you love when my phone buzzing?
Oh dear.
No, nothing bad. Nothing bad.
Well, I've got another question for you, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind, but now you're getting me nervous. So now I'm a little nervous. The more questions.
No, I'm still refining my technique. So anytime I meet a fellow writer, I always ask them this. I always ask, what's the best piece of writing advice you ever got from somebody? Ooh. And then the kind of mirror side of that is what piece of advice do you give writers who are looking for some guidance?
Ooh. Well, one thing that always stuck to me, and I kind of found it probably actually I kind of heard it and found it somewhere near the end. I want to say it was about 2015 is when I stumbled upon this, and it actually was by John Steinbeck. And at the time, all the groups I was in, people who I knew were writers, were trying to say, you have to write X amount of words a day or else you're just not being productive. And the way I wrote, I always sat there and said, okay, I'm gonna sit down and I have an idea of what scenes I want to get done, but I didn't like to box myself in with the word count hit that I needed to hit, because I felt like I was tightening the reins too much, and the writing just wouldn't come as easily. And so I stumbled across John Steinbeck, and he said, forget the 400 pages, just focus on the one page you want to get done when you sit down to write. And so for me, when I read that, I was like, that's perfect. So instead of having this, I have to hit 5,000 words today, I'd sit down and go, I just want to get this scene done. And sometimes it'd be more than 5,000, very rarely, if I had enough time. Usually it'd be between, 1,500 and 3,000 words. And because I didn't limit myself, I would hit those marks pretty smoothly. And back when I was trying to hit the 5,000, I'd struggle to get 1,000, because in the back of my head, I'm like, come on, you got to turn it out. And so when I read that Steinbeck said that, it really resonated with me and really, pushed forward. And then of course, persistence. That was one that I've always heard, that, just keep writing, keep doing it. But the word count when that really got to me, because people tried ramming that down my throats back in the day. If you're not being productive enough, you're not doing enough writing and all that. And I'm like, well, no, read Steinbeck's thing and go take it. And if I had to give any advice, one piece of advice I'd want to give is find out your why. Like, why are you writing? Are you writing because you know you want to be the next Stephen King or the next James Patterson, or are you writing because you truly love to do it and it's part of who you are? And the reason that I've said that to people is because if you're writing to try to achieve, you know, Stephen King status or James Patterson or anything that's way up there, I feel like you might lose a little bit of the fun along the journey, or about why you write in the first place. And to me, it's because I couldn't see myself not writing. And that's kind of why I had to get back into it, is that a part of myself was missing. Like during the time I wasn't writing, it felt very, you know, ever since I started back up again about 6 months ago, I just really have felt reinvigorated. I'm happier. I'm sleeping better. For me, my why, I had to really readjust my why this year and not say, okay, I'm trying to be the next New York Times #1 bestseller, when in fact it's like, no, I want to write my books, publish them, and if I can make it, you know, some money on the side or a side living with it, that'd be great. That's what I had. So find out your why would be one of my big ones.
Yeah, if I could just spin off of that a little bit, I do
please.
a lot of critiquing groups and stuff like that at cons and whatnot, and very close to what you said. A lot of times I'll run into a story that, you know, is technically pretty good, you know, checked off all the boxes, and it's, you know, fairly well written, but it's just, for all that, it's a little bit flat, you know. And I always ask the person, you know, what in the story do you think is true? Have you told me a truth that you really care about in this story? You know, or is there some piece of the story that, you know, connects to you or connects to someone you know that you think is important, you know? And it usually says, no, I was just trying to write, you know, a good sword and sorcery story, because, you know, they were asking for sword and sorcery at this magazine I like to write. You know, well, fantastic, but whoops, I jostled my computer accidentally. But, you know, unless you've got something you're kind of passionate about, or a truth you want to relay to your audience, you know, it's just going to be mechanical, you know. Put some love into it. Put some love into it. Something you love.
You know, it's really, so here's the crazy thing, guys. We didn't go over these, like, we didn't share answers with these questions before, and so it's very rewarding to me to hear something, because I'm nowhere near your level, Eric. I've self-published 8 books, but nowhere near any type of mass success, which when I first started writing, I was geared towards that. And, you know, my editor, who I have now, with my newest one, he was reading it and he calls me. I sent him the first 4 chapters, kind of pitched it to him and said, here's what I'm working on. And he called me like 2 hours later and goes, holy shit, you did it. And I said, is this a good holy, like what do you mean? He goes, oh, he's like, finally. He's like, your other books, and he said the same words you said, they were flat, your characters were cookie cutter, they weren't into it. He goes, I don't know what you've done, but he's like, I'm hooked on these characters. Like in my first 7 chapters, there's no real huge big baddie, there's no big battle scene. There's one scene that's a bit intense, like in chapter 6, but I told him the difference is I'm writing now because I want to, and because the story is in my head and I really want to tell it, not because I'm trying to hit this level of success or hit the Amazon best-selling charts or any of that stuff. And he said, well, whatever it is, you need to keep it, because this story is like, he wants me to send it out to agents and stuff instead of self-publishing, which I'm still on the fence about how I want to go forward from it. But it was reassuring. It's just what you said. I put myself into it more than I did before, because my passion, I guess, is now coming through with it. It makes the characters better. So I'm glad it's doing that. But I think I need to rewrite my older stuff. Is what I'm starting to think. Oh, I had to have a little sip of the beer there. So thank you for that. I had no idea how much as much as you guys are gaining from watching this, trust me, I'm gaining just as much from doing the interview here. I'm just saying it's for both of our benefits. To go off of the writing, because I'm curious, this is always a question I like to ask writers and artists, is that, like, do you have a certain routine, like a certain writing schedule? And if you do, like what is it? Or do you just kind of write whenever the muse hits you or the story starts to come?
Yeah, I wish I could write whenever the muse hits me, but it's a chaotic life.
Yep.
We're in a a nice suburb of Chicago, right outside the city limits, in a 2-bedroom condo with 3 kids.
Oh
So,
gosh. Yeah.
you can imagine. You
Yes.
can imagine. Um, so I basically have to work when everyone else is asleep and the house is quiet and stuff like that. I call it going down into my submarine. At least that's what I always called it with my wife. My kids don't quite get it, but
I like
it takes me about 15 minutes, to be perfectly honest, to get down into the story, and I'm rather than being surrounded by the dog and the cat, and the fact that I need to remember to go get celery at the grocery store and stuff like that. I'm in the world of my writing,
yes.
out of our world and in the world of my writing. So I tend to, when I'm in a good groove, I get up in the morning before everyone else, and I try and get a good hour, 90 minutes or something like that. um and my wife gets up, she hops on her exercise bike, she knows not to disturb me when I'm when I've got the
I
game
know.
face on. But yeah. And another thing that is helpful to me in if I can get like an hour away, is I use the Pomodoro technique, which goes back to my days in the corporate world in IT. I don't know if you've ever heard of it,
Hmm.
but it was really popular in the IT world for programmers who needed to intensely concentrate on something. And the idea is you set a timer. The guy who invented it was a tomato timer that his mom had given him
Oh, that's awesome.
for 25 minutes, and you do one task. You just work on one thing. You don't check email, your phone is off or on airplane mode. You don't even get up out of your chair. You sit there and you do your one thing for 25 minutes, then bing, the bell rings and you get a 5-minute break. And then you do another 25
Huh.
minutes and bing, you get a 5-minute break. And that helps me when when it's an afternoon lull, the kids are fed, the dishes are done, stuff like the dog is walked. I go down, I put on my headphones, I set my timer, and bing, 25 minutes, just super hard concentration on the work. I try and have absolute television, and the kids luckily are now old enough to know that when dad's at the keyboard and he's got his headphones on, not to disturb him, unless he's playing a video game, then they can disturb me. But yeah, you can, but again, like you were talking about with your word count, I never try and do whether I'm just writing quietly in the first thing in the morning or doing a Pomodoro, I never try and hit a word count. I'm just trying to get good sentences, good dialogue, good scenes. I'm going for quantity rather than quality, always, always, always. So if I will have a 2,000, a 3,000 word day sometimes if I get real lucky.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's 1,000, 1,500, something like that, and I'm really happy with that, considering the chaos we live in.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, and those of you watching, if you are, just starting in your writing, or even if you're whatever stage of the writing journey you're on, let that be, big advice to you, that you don't have to sit there and hit these massive, because I know you've seen people do it too. They're like, you have to hit 10,000 words or 5,000 words a day, when in reality, I have to agree with you, Eric, 100%. I'm much more quantity. If I can get 800 quality words that I know are going to make it through my first round of edits, it's really good story and gripping, I'll take that over 5,000 words. I'm going to end up cutting out 2,000 to 3,000 anyway, and an editing process. So I'm the same way. Quality way trumps quantity every day.
Yeah.
Now, question for you. You said you put on this is a random question for my benefit. Do you listen to music, or is that like noise canceling headphones?
I can do music when I'm editing, but drafting, no, music distracts me. With drafting, I just put on the ticker of my timer really, really low.
Oh, okay.
And it's almost like a Pavlovian thing to remind me.
Oh, yes, like see, I'm a drummer. It's like the metronome helping you keep time.
Yeah. It helps.
It.
It helps me concentrate and keeps it's just a little, that tiny little bit. It's very faint, a little bit of white noise. I also back pre-pandemic, I'd go to a cafe. A tiny amount of business and the noise in the background, I actually think helps me a little bit.
Yep, white noise.
Yeah, a little bit of white noise. If although if a couple of women are sitting down next to me, had coffee, talking about one super hot date the previous night. I'm screwed. I am screwed because I'm listening to that. But but as long as it's just abstract busyness, as long as it's abstract business, I'm good.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I think that, and see, it's the reason I ask is that I think I'm one of the few, and I don't think it's just, I think it's because I am a drummer and stuff that for me, I'm able to use that as like the wall of sound almost. Now I can't listen to like, metal or crazy rock, but I'll put on like Howard Shore or, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank, like John Williams, like symphony stuff for movies and things. If it's not like a main theme from a movie, I can have that in the background while I'm writing, but I try to do what you do. My first draft, I try to I go in where my office is, I go at my desk, and I go ham, I go at it. But then when I'm doing a second draft, like you said, I can put on the music, and it helps for me. It helps the time go by faster because I don't enjoy editing anywhere near as much as I do the first draft. And I think because that first draft's so personal, I don't really want that anything outwardly influencing what's already coming out, because it's so not pure. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean. I don't want it to be influenced by other stuff unless it started off that way.
Yeah, editing for me it's a completely different part of my brain. I can sit there and eat a cup of noodles and edit. I can, kind of deal with the kids. I can watch a movie. I can listen to music. I can do anything when I'm editing. It's the drafting where I need, I need to be in the zone.
I agree. Well, I'm gonna do one more. I'm gonna save the last question I sent you because we actually I told you we'd go longer. I knew that once we started talking, it was gonna be too much fun. If you're okay with it, I'll do one more. I'll do the fourth one I sent you, and then we can save. Maybe we can do a second episode talking about the publisher.
Part 2. We could talk about movie music.
That's what I'm saying. Like
movie
we can do an episode 2. We'll do an episode
easy.
2 about what beers we drink with what music. Who knows?
And what beers we drink with the music. Yeah, Jerry Goldsmith, man, he rules.
See, well, so I had to ask you this then. So, the reason I mentioned this series isn't because I didn't like the Dragon books either. It's just that this one, for some reason, for me, really hit home. And it's the Vampire Earth series. It really is such an amazing read. It's such the story itself is 14 books, correct? It might be.
I thought it was 11, but I don't know. I haven't counted them off in a while.
It could be. Well, either way, way more than what I've done in a series. And so it is definitely epic in scope. And so when you started writing it with Way of the Wolf, did you have any idea that it was going to be as big as it was or as much of a success as it was?
Well, I didn't think it would, go on and the publisher would keep wanting more. But yeah, I kind of sketched out a biography of Valentine and was just going to follow it along a little bit. He plays a key role in some things and a minor role in some others. And when you say series, I like to more think of it as a whole bunch of standalone books set in the same world.
Okay.
I've tried to write them so that, if you just are thumbing through a store and you see this, thing called, Fall with Honor, and you pick it up and you start reading it, it's not super important that, the whole world. You can kind of pick it up a little bit.
That's true.
I've tried to do each one as a standalone, and like the Hornblower books. I really love the Hornblower books. You can pick up any Hornblower book and kind of get into it. It helps if you know the other stuff, but it's not absolutely necessary. But yeah, I did not know that it would go on that long. I would have been happy if just it had been Way of the Wolf and nothing else. But luckily that it did well enough so that they wanted more.
So when you did Way of the Wolf, you didn't plan out anything like Choice of the Cat or
I had a vague idea that at some point he's going to meet this big grog who will call him my David. That's a little hat tip to Alistair MacLean, by the way, and Keith Mallory and Andrea Stavro, for those of you who've read Guns of Navarone. But I always imagined that was going to happen as part of his life, and that these are some of the issues he's going to be dealing with. But I didn't have this is what's going to happen in book 1, book 2, book 3. It wasn't like a Lord of the Rings situation. You know, this has got to end with destroying the ring. You know, that
Yeah.
there was no final confrontation in the end that I had sketched out. It's more like the Napoleonic Wars. He's involved in these long ongoing wars, and
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you say that, because now once you mentioned that you were writing them as almost like just standalone novels in the same universe, when I think back to all the books, like, you're right, you could pick up any one of them and be given enough information to read that story, understand what's going on, and follow that story to completion, and still be satisfied. But at the same time, there are instances, like, for instance, as he gets older, the injury he has and things like that, have you but the good thing is that even if you read it, it just makes you curious. But for me, having read the entire series chronologically, there's those Easter eggs, those things that tie in book to book that you can keep track of as well. So that is so awesome that you did not plan this broad epic. You just said, hey, here's this guy, and I'm gonna follow him along his journeys through his battles with the Currian Order as they go. And that's awesome.
There is a last scene in mind, but I haven't written it. Maybe I'll never write it.
Don't you can't say that to me.
Maybe when the doctor tells me, oh, sorry, Eric, you've got 6 months to live, then I'll write the last scene and publish it as a little mini book or something like that. But yeah, there is a last scene I have in mind.
Well, let me ask you this thing, because the last one's Baltic Gambit, if I remember correctly. That's
Duvallier's point of view. Yeah.
So are you planning on having another one coming soon, or do you have anything in the works ready to?
Well, yeah, I've got a whole outline and for Georgia Showdown, it's called. Ooh. But there's not the Onka book and the Duvalier book didn't do that great. So there's not a lot of interest out there. That's why I went back to the Dragons for the Dragoneer Academy books to hopefully, after having little kids around the house, restart my career a little bit and then, get some mojo going and maybe be able to get another one out there. We'll see. The pandemic hit and, my sale got hit hard and, we'll see what happens. So.
Well, and I'd like to do another episode where we can dive more into the publishing side of it and stuff like that too, because every time I have writers on, it always goes longer than artists, because I don't know the artist stuff. So I'm more of like, oh, really? Like, I don't have anything to give to that. Sorry. I don't know what it's like to be doing that kind of stuff. And I will say that the Dragon, like, I saw that you got the Dragon, you got 2 in that series, right?
Yeah. And the third is, I'm editing it right now. The first 2 of the sales were a little disappointing. Again, COVID. So I don't know if it's that I'm misstepped or if there's just not enough action, the kind of action my audience is used to. So I've kind of torn the third apart and completely rewritten it, kind of like I did with Dragon Outcast, except more of it was written. So we'll see. Hopefully I can get it out there.
Well, that's all. And if people want to follow you, Eric, where can they follow you on social media and stuff to be able to see what you're up to?
Well, I don't do a lot of social media. It's just,
I saw you just posted that picture in your
Facebook page, which is how you found me.
Yeah.
And then I've got a Twitter feed, which is just,
thoughts.
It's more stuff like a funny thing I saw in Oak Park today, or what I'm currently mad about. It's my Twitter feed isn't a whole lot of here's writing tip number 305 for night. It's
that'd be interesting. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Look at it this way, and they can either go on Facebook like I did, because I was looking to try to find a contact for you, trying to do it through email and try to find something. And so I found on Facebook. I'm like, so this is a little tidbit to you all watching. I messaged Eric without knowing if I was going to hear back, because I've reached out to other writers and I just hear crickets, and I'm like, okay, either my pitch is wrong, or it could just be that they don't know who I am at this point. And I'm too new with the interview stuff that they just don't know what it is. So,
or I ignored Facebook for a couple of days, which happens all the time too. So
that's true too. So I have to say that. Well, thank you, Eric, so much for coming on today, for sharing with your writing and everything. I had a great time. I hope you did too.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I really like the whole concept of having beer while you're having an interview.
Right?
It really works.
I'm telling you, I think so. Well, Eric, this is so awesome, man. And I'll be reaching out to you soon, so we can do an interview part 2, maybe dive more into the publishing, editing side that people sometimes have questions with and stuff as well.
Cool. I'll tell my friends in the industry what a
yeah,
good time this is. So hopefully you'll get a couple of other interesting people. I know a super talented horror artist. And
yeah, please do. I'm always trying to expand. Please do.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, you're welcome. Bye.